a university professor with over 15 years in academia. I've taught long enough to know that students are students no matter the institution. Curious, skeptical, and masters of procrastination. But last autumn, I accepted a position at a smaller, more specialized college in the north. I found myself in charge of a cohort of students unlike any I'd lectured before. They weren't disruptive, just reserved, perhaps wary. They could be passionately debating philosophy one minute, then fall into an absolute, unnerving silence the next. It was during one of these silences that I first observed their practice. At first I assumed it was a variation of a memory exercise or a specific cultural recitation. They would form a loose ring, slowly walking around a chosen individual, and begin a rhythmic chant. It wasn't a recognized formula, just a cadence of names. All the while, the person in the center, the id, would subtly provoke, challenge, or trick the others into speaking their own full name. Whoever slipped up became id next. That much of the structure I could decipher. The rules themselves weren't what unsettled me. It was the absolute gravity with which they approached it. The ritual always commenced the same way. Voices hushed, steps precise, a nervous, almost ritualistic reverence. The campus common area could be buzzing with activity, yet when that circle formed, the ambient noise seemed to recede, as if an invisible boundary had descended around them, and the chosen individual never looked like they were participating in a game. They didn't smile, joke, or engage in playful evasion. They were always slumped, shoulders tense, eyes fixed downward. More than once, I saw genuine distress. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was a form of psychological theater, a dramatic way to raise the stakes. Students invent these kinds of things. Penalty rules, undesirable roles, to enhance an experience. Yet, it left a profound sense of unease. Sometimes they would try to draw me in. "Come on, Professor. What's your first name?" They'd call out, grinning as if about to spring a trap. "Just your first name. Just once." But I'd maintained a clear boundary throughout my career. Academics who reveal too much, too soon, often regret it. I'd simply smile, shake my head, and repeat the line I'd carried for years. "I am Dr. Finch to you, nothing more." Their attempts were quickly abandoned. They'd shrug, share a quiet laugh, and return to their circle, whispering amongst themselves. I might have dismissed the whole thing had it not been for the incident that Tuesday. It had already been a difficult week. Relentless gray weather, distracted students, and an excess of nervous energy. During the late study period, I saw them form the circle again. This time, the person in the center was Leo, a young man I knew well. He'd been struggling with severe personal issues, frequent absences, a distant family, and mounting financial pressures. I'd spent extra time with him, patiently guiding his research, praising every small achievement, and now, here he was, it. The other students circled him, their voices low and urgent. Leo's head was bowed, his hands tightly clenched. He wasn't simply pouting. I could see the pale, drawn tightness around his mouth, the faint tremor in his shoulders. He looked depleted, as if some vital internal energy had been hollowed out and replaced only with dread. My stomach tightened. I'd seen plenty of students sulk over poor grades. This wasn't sulking, it was despair, and as I took a step closer, I swore I saw his lips moving, whispering something under his breath, not to the others or to himself, but to something else. The entire scene felt profoundly wrong. When the session ended, I intercepted Leo before he could blend into the rush of students. He walked slowly, shoulders hunched, trying to avoid my gaze. "Walk with me, Leo," I said, guiding him towards a quiet alcove by the library. He sat down reluctantly, clutching the strap of his messenger bag like a shield. "You seemed distressed out there," I began gently. "The practice. It didn't look like an enjoyable activity for you." Leo hunched further, his eyes fixed on the floor tiles. "It's just the rule, Professor." "It doesn't have to be," I countered. "If the other students are putting undue pressure on you, I can intervene. No one should be made to feel that way." That sparked a flicker of attention. His eyes darted up, then quickly away. "You don't understand. Then help me understand. I can't resolve what I don't know." Silence stretched between us. I waited. Years of teaching had instilled patience, but also the ability to recognize when a student was suppressing something critically important. Finally, he shook his head. "It's not pressure. It's the rules." "What rules?" He pressed his lips together. When I leaned in closer, he whispered almost inaudibly, "We can't tell. If we tell, you join the game." I frowned. "You can tell me. I won't let the others know." No answer. He hunched lower, collapsing inward. His face looked far older than a 19-year-old's should. Gaunt and profoundly weary. It was like I was speaking to someone who had already witnessed too much. I tried a different approach. "Leo, you're a sharp student. You know activities are supposed to be engaging. But when you participate in this one, you look like you're carrying a devastating weight. That's not a game. That's—" I stopped, carefully choosing my words. "That's heavy, and I don't like seeing you carry it." He shook his head again. "You can't help." Something in his tone struck me deeply. A resignation that no young person should possess. For the rest of the evening I couldn't shake it. I kept glancing at him during the seminar, watching his pen move listlessly across the notepad. His eyes clouded with an emotion I couldn't categorize. At the faculty lunch the next day, I tried again, this time with the whole cohort. I leaned against the podium as they opened their meal trays and conversed. "So," I said casually, "that activity you all enjoy, the name one. What's the point of it?" A chilling silence spread across the room. Conversation ceased mid-sentence. Even the most vocal students stared down at their food. "It's just a game," one student muttered. "It looks a little more serious than that." No one replied. I scanned their faces. Every one of them was tense, actively avoiding eye contact. Then a young woman at the back, either brave or careless, spoke without lifting her head. "If you don't pass it on, it stays." The room became instantly rigid. A few students quickly shushed her. She nervously took a bite of a protein bar and refused to say another word. I raised my eyebrows, trying to maintain a light tone. "Pass what on?" The silence that followed was absolute. I let the subject drop, unwilling to frighten them further, but the words echoed in my mind all afternoon. "If you don't pass it on, it stays." I found myself repeatedly looking at Leo. His face was pale, his movements lethargic. It wasn't the look of someone being teased. It was the look of someone bearing a load he couldn't release. By the final bell, my decision was cemented. I had never compromised my professional boundaries before, never blurred the line between Dr. Finch and the students. But seeing Leo in that state, knowing he carried something he believed he couldn't share, it consumed me. if joining their practice offered me the slightest leverage to help these students, it was a necessary sacrifice. So the next day during the study break, when the circle formed and the low chanting began, I approached them. Leo's eyes widened when I knelt beside him. "Tell you what," I said softly. "How about I play this time?" The students froze mid-step, their faces instantly pale. The circle went utterly still, 20 students frozen in place, their eyes locked on me as though I had violated a sacred covenant. "Professors don't play," one of the young women whispered. "Why not?" I asked, keeping my tone gentle, slightly amused. "Seems like it could be quite challenging. Perhaps I'll be better at it than you think." Leo's lips parted, his expression caught between sheer terror and sudden hope. For the first time all week, his shoulders seemed to relax. "You can," he whispered, "but you have to do it right." "And what is the correct procedure?" I asked. His eyes flickered up to mine. "You have to say your full name." The words caused the rest of the circle to flinch. One young man twisted through his teeth, shaking his head. Another tugged desperately at Leo's sleeve, urging him to be silent. But Leo was resolute. "It doesn't count otherwise," I hesitated. 15 years in the classroom had taught me the necessity of professional boundaries. My first name was one of them. I had never revealed it, not under any circumstances. It was the crucial line that maintained my authority. I was always Dr. Finch. And yet, Leo was smiling now. Faintly, the first genuine smile I had seen from him in weeks. A fragile but undeniable thing. What real harm could a name do? "All right," I said, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "Just this once." I leaned in and whispered it. "Alistair Finch." The change was instantaneous. The circle, which had been stiff with apprehension, erupted into motion. The students' voices rose in a sudden, frantic chant, names spilling out in a rush of rhythm. They circled me, faces pale but their eyes fixed, the words tumbling over each other in a frenzy. Leo staggered backward, relief washing over his face like a tidal wave. He let out a sharp, almost hysterical laugh, before instantly clamping both hands over his mouth. Color surged back into his cheeks. His eyes were bright again, as if an invisible crushing weight had been instantly lifted from his shoulders. They glanced at me, then at each other, then back at Leo. I realized this wasn't the laughter of a shared joke. This was the laughter of release. I had taken something from him, something he was profoundly glad to lose. By the time the bell rang, the practice was over. The students scattered, hastily zipping bags, rushing toward the cafeteria. The usual loud, unbothered chatter returned, as though the past hour had never occurred, all except Leo. He lingered, grinning sheepishly as he adjusted his bag straps. "Thanks, Dr. Finch," he whispered, then darted off after the others. For the rest of the afternoon I felt an internal warmth. He was noticeably lighter, brighter. He raised his hand twice during the reading group, and even volunteered to assist with collecting assignments. Seeing him unburdened made the earlier unease seem worth the price. Perhaps the whole practice really was just a strange, intense psychological ritual, and my intervention had provided the relief he desperately needed. That night, the doubts began. I was grading papers in the quiet of my apartment when I first heard it, faint and indistinct. My pen froze mid-mark. "Finch." I held my breath, listening. Alistair Finch. It seemed to come from the kitchen. No, not from the kitchen. It was moving through the structure, whispered as though someone leaned close behind my ear, but with no accompanying breath, no physical body. I stood up, heart pounding, checking every room. Nothing. Windows locked, door bolted, silence. Back at the desk, the papers were scattered, subtly rearranged. My name was written across them in faint, uneven strokes, lettered again and again by invisible hands. I quickly gathered them and shoved them into a drawer, then sat in the dark, pulse hammering. From the corner of the room, just beyond the reach of the lamplight, came the whisper again. Alistair Finch. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it repeated, patient, endless, as though something had finally learned the crucial information it required. The whispers did not stop, never loud, just persistently present, slipping through the cracks of my apartment at night, curling under the hum of the air conditioner, murmuring from the dark corners of the bedroom, always my full name, patient, relentless. It wasn't violent, but it made every aspect of reality feel fundamentally wrong. At the college, it followed me, subtly interrupting my lectures on a semi-regular basis. The students noticed when I stumbled through roll call, distracted. They exchanged quick, darting looks. Whispers sparked between them. He's it now. The collector is on him. The relief on Leo's face now seemed far deeper than any guilt. He smiled in a way I'd never seen him smile before. Full, complete, and unburdened. He was light as air. That was when I finally understood. The game wasn't cruel. It wasn't bullying. It was survival, a necessary ritual, not for amusement, but to pass on the crushing weight before it hollowed them out completely. And now, the weight was mine. By the third day, the headaches began. They were not normal, just a constant crushing pressure on the back of my skull, like a hand pressing there and never letting go. Sleep came in small, useless fragments, half an hour at a time, before the whispers snapped me awake. In the lecture hall, I caught myself muttering, not whole sentences or lessons, but my own name, over and over, my lips moving soundlessly until I realized what I was doing. And every time I slipped, the room seemed to darken a fraction, as if something had leaned closer to hear. The students noticed before I admitted it to myself. At first they were delighted. I stumbled over complex theories, forgot reading assignments, let the schedule drift. My faltering control meant longer breaks, free study periods, and casual games spilling into class time. The laughter echoed down the halls, unrestrained and wild. But joy only lasts so long before it curdles against fear. By the end of the week, my hands shook when I attempted to write on the whiteboard. My eyes burned, heavy with exhaustion, dark crescents blooming beneath them. Once, mid-sentence, I stopped cold, utterly unable to recall what I had just been saying. The silence stretched until one student nervously supplied the correct term. The laughter vanished. Now the whispers in the classroom were no longer playful. They were anxious. I'd look up from grading and find 20 pairs of eyes watching me, wide and uncertain. Even Leo, freed from his burden, avoided my gaze. Relief lingered in his face, yes, but guilt too. The smile he carried had dimmed to something smaller, tighter. He knew what I was now carrying. By the time Friday arrived, I could barely hold the chalk. I leaned against the desk, the room spinning. words stumbling from my mouth in fragments. The students sat frozen, study aids untouched, pens idle in their hands. They were no longer celebrating. When the bell rang, they filed out slowly, whispering among themselves. I sat with my head in my hands, fighting the urge to mutter my own name out loud. That was when I noticed the folded scrap of paper tucked beneath my notebook. Small, careful handwriting in pencil. Don't keep it too long. It hurts. My chest tightened. No signature, just the warning. By the second week, I began to seriously consider the unthinkable. The thought crept in during roll call. I read the names in order: Jen, Diaz, Harper, each student answering here without hesitation. But what if I pressed harder? I imagined pausing over a student's name, pretending to mispronounce it, then frowning until they corrected me, not just their first name, but the whole thing, drawn out for clarity, their full name. The practice would recognize it. The collector would shift to them. I pictured it again during a written quiz. I could hand back papers, insisting on an unexpected formality. Read your name for me, all of it, a professor's simple request. They wouldn't question it. The burden would fall, just like it always did in the ritual. The images made me sick, but they clung to me nonetheless. Yet, when I glanced up, I saw their faces, not mischievous now, or playful, but deeply concerned, eyes darting to my shaking hands, my ashen skin, the way I stumbled through lessons. Their worry hit me harder than the whispers ever could. I dropped the papers, my voice rough. Go on, study break. They scattered too quickly, the relief obvious. In the sudden quiet, I heard a murmur by the window. Carried on, no wind. A quiet young woman lingered, adjusting her sleeve. She didn't meet my eyes when she said, "You're not supposed to keep it. It's worse if you do." "Worse? How?" I asked, my voice cracking. She only shook her head. "We don't know. Nobody ever lasts this long." That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The whispers filled every shadow, pressing against my ears, my throat, the corners of the room. For the first time I thought of outsiders. Another professor, a clerk at the grocery store, my sister if I called her, anyone, someone who could take it, someone who wouldn't know how the practice worked. But the thought instantly collapsed. They didn't know the rules. They wouldn't understand the ritual, wouldn't know how to pass it on. What if they kept it forever? What if they broke under the pressure? And worse, they'd know who had given it to them. I pressed my palms into my eyes until I saw sparks. My own whispering lips brushed the silence. My name, again and again, unbidden. From the corner of the room, the collector stirred. I couldn't see it, not directly, but I felt it, leaning closer, listening. I clenched my jaw against the chilling truth. The longer I held it, the more I knew I was treading into a place no student had ever survived. It didn't take weeks for the symptoms to worsen. Just days. The headaches deepened into persistent nausea. My hands trembling so badly, I had to steady the chalk with both. The students stopped laughing at my mistakes. Their eyes now followed me with a fearful pity. And then I began to see it. At first, only in the corners of my vision. Something pale and oddly bent, watching from the far end of the hall. Each time I turned, it was gone. A trick of exhaustion, I told myself. But by Thursday, it no longer waited in the periphery. In the middle of a complex proof, I glanced at the back of the lecture hall and froze. It was standing between the last row of desks, too tall, its shoulders brushing the ceiling, a body too thin for its height, limbs bent at angles that suggested too many joints. Where a face should have been was only a hollow, black and glistening, as if something had been carved out from within. The worst part wasn't the sight. The worst part was that the students didn't react. Their pens scratched quietly on the page, as if nothing monstrous loomed above them, as if I was the only one who could see it. My throat closed. A sound tried to climb out, my name whispered against my will. But I bit down so hard my teeth rattled. The figure tilted its head, the void where its face should have been rippled. Stretching, I staggered against the desk. "Dr. Finch," one of the students asked, her voice a terrified whisper. The room had gone silent. 20 pens stilled mid-word. 20 faces turned toward me, wide-eyed and afraid. And in that profound silence, the thought struck me. Better me than them. Because if I passed it on now, if one of these students slipped and saw what I had just seen, it would carve them hollow. It would break them completely. I couldn't do that. Not to them. My vision blurred. The lecture hall tilted. For one awful moment, I thought I might simply collapse to the floor in front of them, letting it take me then and there. But the whispering faded just enough for me to steady myself. I clutched the edge of the desk until my knuckles whitened. The students didn't move. They knew what was happening, and they knew I hadn't passed it on. No one spoke as I gathered the chalk again, my hand shaking so hard the word I wrote was illegible. And then, in the middle of the next sentence, everything went black. Just for a breath, a blink, but long enough that when I opened my eyes, 20 students were staring at me in perfect silence. They knew I was breaking. The hall emptied in a rush of coats and backpacks, the chatter fading down the corridor. I stayed at my desk, staring at the blank board, the chalk still trembling in my hand. My body felt like wet paper, thin, tearing under its own weight. I almost didn't notice her. A quiet student, small for her age, stood by the doorway, twisting the strap of her bag. When I looked up, she met my eyes with a steadiness that startled me. Not fear or mischief, but something older. "You can't hold it forever," she said softly. The words froze me in place. Before I could respond, she stepped into the room. "Play with me." My stomach dropped. "No." My voice cracked, harsher than I intended. "Absolutely not." But she didn't move. Her eyes stayed locked on mine. "You'll break. You already are. It's not supposed to stay with one person this long." I shook my head, heat pricking behind my eyes. "You don't know what it's like," I whispered. "You don't know what I've seen." Her voice didn't waver. "I know enough. We all do." The silence stretched. I thought of Leo's relief, the way his shoulders had lifted the instant I joined the practice. I thought of the note slipped under my papers. "Don't keep it too long. It hurts." And I knew she was right. Still, the thought of handing that burden back to a student tore at me. I grabbed the edge of the desk, fighting the words. "You're just a kid." She gave a small, almost sad smile. "So are all of us." We didn't gather the whole cohort, just the two of us, a small circle in the quiet of the empty room. She stood across from me, hands clasped, eyes calm. I tried to stall, to explain, to beg her not to do it, but she only shook her head. This is how it works. You know it. We all do. The chant began. I stumbled through it, my voice ragged. She answered as the students always did, steady, unafraid. And then she slipped deliberately. She said her own, full name aloud, clear and sharp, her eyes never leaving mine. The moment the word left her mouth, I felt it. The weight vanished, the crushing pressure in my skull, the whispers in the corners, the sick dread that clung to me like damp clothes. Gone, just gone. For the first time in weeks, I felt light, clear, and truly alive. My breath came free and easy, my hands stilled. The silence in the room was clean. I almost collapsed with relief. She smiled faintly, the sadness never leaving her face. See? Better. My throat closed. You shouldn't have. It's okay, she interrupted. Her voice was calm, certain. We all take turns. Before I could answer, the rest of the cohort had gathered in the doorway, drawn back by instinct. They didn't cheer or laugh. They simply surrounded her, solemn, quiet, their eyes filled with an understanding that ran far too deep for young adults. I looked at her again. Her shoulders had slumped. The same weight I'd carried was settling onto her. I could see it in the way her smile trembled, the faint, glassy exhaustion creeping into her eyes. The collector was with her now. I didn't hear it anymore, but I knew the guilt hit me like a wave. I wanted to take it back, to hold it forever, if it meant she wouldn't have to see what I had seen. But she only stood a little straighter, nodded once, and whispered, "It's lighter now, for everyone." By the following week, the rhythm of the college common area had returned. From my office window, I watched them form their circle, feet shuffling, voices rising in their strange chant. A name would slip, a flash of laughter would flare, and the burden would shift. The practice carried on as it always had, but I finally understood. It wasn't malice, it wasn't cruelty, it was mercy. The collector was too heavy for one person to bear indefinitely. Passing it on wasn't meanness, it was a desperate act of survival. They had all learned the essential rule: never hold on too long, never let it root too deeply. I walked among them during the study period. They scattered around me, debating, trading notes, engaged in their normal lives. But always, in one quiet corner of the hall, the circle formed. Always the chant rose. And sometimes I saw the practice go wrong. A student held it too long. Their eyes dulled, their shoulders drooped. They slipped in lessons, grew withdrawn. The others would press in, circling faster, trying to force the exchange. But the student resisted, clinging to it out of fear or confusion. That was when I stepped in. Their voices rose, overlapping, tricking, challenging, and I would let myself falter. I would let the words slip, my own full name on my tongue, clear and deliberate. The chant snapped shut around me. The air would shift, heavy and sharp. I felt the weight settle back onto my shoulders, like a familiar, suffocating cloak. The students watched, and then they moved on. As the circle broke apart, I stayed behind, my shoulders bowed beneath the invisible weight. The whispers returned, my name repeated in the hush between heartbeats, settling into me once more.